My name is Sam Robinson, and this will be the first episode of the podcast series and videocast series called Mystery Occultism. And as an intro, I would like to initially begin by explaining why I've even become interested in this extremely taboo and rather arcane subject called occultism, or you can call it the occult, which is really an ancient tradition that stems back into antiquity. And how I chanced upon this field of study was rather synchronistic and to a degree random. So let's begin. As a young boy and in my teenage years, I was very interested in what would be considered mysteries or unexplained things throughout history, or semi-secret organizations, not that secret, like the Knights Templar, the story of Atlantis, the ancient world, and the nature of the buildings that they were erect with their limited technology that we know of, and how they were much grander than some buildings, a lot of buildings that we build today, and were erected with stones that were so massive, weighing over 100 tons in some cases, that would defy any logical reasonability that they could pull it off. And even in the historical narrative and records, they allege that some of them say the Great Pyramid of Giza was done in allegedly 20 years by Cheops and by slave labor. Well, that never sat well with me, and I thought there might be better explanations, but I didn't dive too far into it. I was your average person, and was not very religiously inclined or spiritually inclined, and grew up with a general Protestant background and became agnostic in my 20s while I was studying history in college and philosophy. And interestingly enough, never encountered the idea of occult philosophy or esoteric spiritual philosophy that was akin to what I encountered in 2016 by a book my sister gave me that sat on the shelf. I can't really remember for how long, maybe 6 months to a year, that she got on a whim thinking I might be interested based on the title. This book would be Manly Palmer Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages. She didn't really know what she got me, and I didn't really know what I had. One day, in 2016, in April, I was going through a rough time in my life, and I kind of started diving back into topics on YouTube, like Atlantis, megalithic structures, and I picked it up one day, and I encountered material and explanations of mythological stories and the nature of man's spiritual aspects and his relationship to the divine that I'd never encountered in college, even though I'd studied philosophy, and I'd studied Greek philosophy and the pre-Socratics and post-Socratics and Plato and Pythagoras, and I somehow had never come across the other term for this subject matter, which is called esotericism, or esoteric concepts, which means the inner concepts, as opposed to exoteric, which means the outer shell of the same type of concepts. Now, what I didn't realize, and until I read that book, which was a compendium, encyclopedia of esoteric information across all cultures, from Zoroastrianism in ancient Persia and Iran to Egyptian mysticism and religious thought, and into Babylonian religious thought and mysticism, as well as Druidic, Odinic, meaning Odin, like Norse, and Orphic, related to Orpheus. These are all apparently ancient mystery traditions in the ancient world and were far more sophisticated than I'd been led to believe, and had far more information and deeper meaning behind the stories related to them, and in the mythological stories of seemingly mundane or fantastical narratives that I read about in college and throughout my life. Stories of Zeus, stories of the Roman gods, stories of the Egyptian gods, and just like the average person, I pretty much believed was taken at face value and maybe not created for their own enjoyment or pleasure or made up out of the blue, but did not have any secret hidden meaning or explanations that were other than the ostensible explanations that I encountered and studied in college. And this book dives in, I forget which exact culture, it might be the Zoroastrian, it might be the Egyptian, or it could have been the Druidic. But in the first couple hundred pages, in the first 100 pages, it goes through these ancient cultures and explains their mystery mythology from the esoteric side, which is the side that was taught to their priest class, as opposed to their average population, which would be the exoteric religious version of those same stories, which were the ones that I was knowledgeable about, and did not even realize there was deeper information behind them. And so as I dove in, I became quite fascinated and radically intrigued by the deeper spiritual ideas hidden within these mythological narratives, as well as concepts relating to man specifically, and humanity, rather, in relation to the divine and in relation to the cosmos and our inner selves, whatever that may mean to you. So, immediately, this book drew me in. It's about 600 pages. It covers everything from ancient Judaism to alchemy to zodiacal or zodiac relationships and explanations that are far more than the mundane, reading or, horoscope that you typically encounter in contemporary times, or even in older times. And a lot of the generalized explanations that I had received about all these things were incorrect, lacking many of the details, and far more scientific and logical and rational than I had ever encountered before, or could even think was possible. I was an agnostic. While not necessarily fully anti-religious, and not necessarily a scientific materialist, I had only encountered mainstream religious thought, which is exoteric, and thus being well-educated and not subject to emotional attunement to those religious narratives, I pushed them away. And that was not exactly after my dad. And my dad passed when I was young, at 21. And around that time, I'd already been on that path of kind of becoming agnostic. And I'd gone through the church up until 12th grade and went to college. And like many people of my generation, of the millennial, I was born in 86, 37. I had basically become disenchanted with the explanations provided for me by the mainstream Protestant Christian thought. And while I hadn't looked at other religions quite in depth at all, none of them really drew me in. And but I wasn't not open to spiritual ideas. I just had never come across any that satisfied academically, logically, rationally, in an elaborate way explanations of reality, God, and ourselves in relation to those things, then I've never found one that was adequate, and the ones I presented were not adequate to me in my standards. So, being like an average person, I was totally unaware that there was even a deeper explanation around for any of these concepts of the spirit and of the divine and of mythological meaning, not only from the Bible but from ancient cultures. And when introduced to it, it felt like a piece of a puzzle that I'd held all my life, which was that there must be something more to this world, to this universe, than just matter, material concepts. There had to be something more fantastical and something more non-material, more arcane to reality than what I've been presented in school, than just this super materialistic, scientific, business as usual and career-oriented attainment of simply physical goods and physical capital to acquire, the house, the wife, the kids, the 401k, this path that had been predetermined for me. I rejected it for some reason and thought there should be more, but never found that there was anything more. And when I did find it in these traditions, in this one book, I was so intrigued. I read it in just a few days. 600 pages, very dense, and wrote everything down that I encountered that I'd never heard of, which filled an entire booklet of 100 pages. On every line was just a title, or a concept, or a person, or a tradition, or, like I said, a concept that I'd never encountered before. Well, it filled up the whole book, and I had so much to look into, because this was an encyclopedia of all these concepts. And like I stated, from, ancient pagan thought, real pagan thought, not just the generalized version, all the way up to 16th century alchemy and into modern occult schools of thought, like the Kabbalah, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Esoteric Christianity, commonly referred to as Rosicrucianism, or the Order of the Rosy Cross, which had its origins in an alleged mythical figure named Christian Rosicrucius from around, I guess, the late 1500s to mid 1600s. Not exactly sure of the date. Might be about 1630. And so that one had been around. It's more modern than the pagan ones. And on into the Theosophical Society and Freemasonry, and which are much later derivations. Like in the 1800s, Freemasonry is old, a few hundred years old. Theosophy started in the late 1800s under Helena Blavatsky, who brought the information back from the Far East after her travels and journeys over to Tibet to find ancient schools of religious thought that she did find, and brought back their doctrines and presented them to the West in 1888 and 1876 in their two books. So here I was, 2016, vastly intrigued that there was other explanations, that there were more rational explanations, more rudely speaking, scientific explanations, and sophisticated ones in regards to what, for lack of a better term, invisible realities, and the nature of the divine or the spiritual, and my connection to it, whatever that may be, and latent faculties within humanity that are related to those higher spiritual concepts and ideas and realities. They're basically used to access them, but are in a latent state in the average person in this day and age. in our materialistic age. So this is what started me on a 7-year journey to where I am now, where I've studied many of the major schools of esoteric and occult thought, about half a dozen. I mean, there are others, but these are the main ones, like anthroposophy, theosophy, Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, and then there's the ancient ones, like the Eleusinian mystery tradition, or the Odinic. Obviously not around today, but it's interesting to see the historical context of those in relation to when they were emerged in the West, about over 1,500 years later, in the Renaissance, when some of these fragments and texts were rediscovered in the Middle East and brought back by rich people from Venice, like the Medici family, who had a great interest in not only just those tablets, like the Hermetic Corpus tablets that were discovered, that date back to Roman Alexandrian times, right around the start of the Christian era, alleged the Christian era about 0, or within 200 years of the birth of Christ, either way. Pre-Christ or post-Christ, that was there in Alexandria, and was in form, in academic form. They were like universities, I discovered, of spiritual thought and Hermeticism, which was very, very intriguing to me, and very, very elucidating in terms of proper, sophisticated ideas regarding all these topics. And so I dove in, and the progression occurred over time, where I had to start small. Some of these things are pretty abstract. And I'd say one of the first books I encountered, and it was too difficult at the time, and now it's fairly easy to read for me. The first time I encountered it, I had to put it down because I didn't understand it, even though it's a small book. And it's called The Kabbalion on Hermetic Philosophy, written by the 3 initiates, but you find out it's really written by William Walter Atkinson about 100 years ago. And so he was what you call a new thought advocate, and a Rosicrucian to a degree, at least in that field of thought. Whether or not he was a part of the organization, I don't know. That's to be determined and is up for debate. But what I found that we had in our world was a detailed explanation that was derived from what is commonly called esotericism, or a more specific word, which is occultism, which will be the main basis for this podcast, Mystery Occultism. And so the question that I pose today, and would like to partly answer in this first episode, since most likely your ideas regarding occultism have been misrepresented, or misperceived, mislabeled, or taken out of context, or simply outright lied about by Hollywood and mainstream religious Christian culture, who just doesn't really understand it, or kind of wants a monopoly on the concept of miracles, which is technically magic. Anything not being one of their saints having done it is immediately the worst, the work of the devil, which is a rather unsophisticated viewpoint to take on such things, if you're going to investigate them unbiasedly in an unprejudiced and objective manner. So, what is occultism? What is the occult? How does it not become the various interpretations we were presented in Hollywood. People in the woods, witches doing bizarre rituals and sacrifices of animals and chanting and trying to conjure things and doing, I guess, what we call black magic. Or the idea that it's a bunch of superstitious nonsense, on the other hand, by scientific, rational materialists in our current day. Science has not much good to say about these concepts and disregards them almost entirely, acknowledging only what they consider to be made of physical matter to be real. And even though there are certain breakthroughs happening in quantum physics in regards to that, that are broaching on occult topics, and they don't really know that. But, so what is occultism? And why should we care, so to speak, in this allegedly advanced day and age of 2023 and the Western world? Well, occultism pretty much covers two subjects, if you want to put it broadly. And they are pivotal to any person of any time period and any age. If you have the capacity and the interest and the determination to understand it and utilize its knowledge for understanding how the universe really works and how we really work consciously, how our consciousness works. So, in essence, it can be distilled down to it is hidden, which is all the word occult means. It's Latin. It means hidden or veiled or secreted. It doesn't mean evil. Its etymological translation is just hidden. That's all that it means. It's hidden knowledge. It's hidden knowledge that was reserved for the priest class of this ancient mystery tradition going back to our prehistory and was passed down for generations until driven underground during the late Roman, early Christian Roman era when they decided to attack the mystery tradition and try to destroy it. And largely did so. And practically salted the ground and driving anyone who understood those ideas into the absolute underground and barely a survivor for the most part. And so occultism is the study and explanation and processes that are involved in the patterns of our consciousness, how it works, the nature of what it can do, and the different levels of consciousness that are not acknowledged by generally anyone, certainly not the average person, and typically not in the scientific field of psychology, which only studies the brain. Doesn't study consciousness. We all acknowledge that it's there and that it exists, but they chalk it up to brain processes they haven't fully determined, but think they will finally determine to be generated by the brain. Secondly, the second seed of knowledge that they secreted, mainly to guard it, not because they were evil, but to keep it preserved, was knowledge of the cosmos, natural laws that structure and equalize in equilibrium states of the cosmic structure of reality, and are the guiding laws for the actual creation of the cosmos, say during and after the Big Bang. There are 7 of them that are generally acknowledged, and they're called the 7 Hermetic Principles. And they apply to all levels of reality, whether physical or non-physical. They are always in effect as long as the cosmos exists. And Occultism and its cosmology states that there's cycles of the universe existing and not existing, where there's periods of activity and then periods of non-activity, where there is no cosmos, but then it remanifests. And I'm not going to get into such deep concepts like that tonight. But the point is, when it manifests, when a universe comes into being, these laws go into effect, or otherwise the universe will come to being. They are the designing factors for cosmic unfolding and creation into a sophisticated structure on all levels. And so this is what occultism is. Ancient, deep psychological knowledge of how we work, how our consciousness works in the subconscious realm and in what they call the superconscious realm. And the superconsciousness is an elevated, higher state of consciousness than the waking consciousness, and can only be achieved through hard work and intense meditative discipline practice over many years, for the most part, and along certain technical or technique lines of training to where you can access these superconscious states almost in a trance. But they allow you to have clairvoyance, superior sense perception of things that are not fully physical, and of higher realms. But it's not easy. It's not like what would be called the New Age teaches. It's much more academic. It's much more rigorous. It's much less. It's much less easy. It's not going to be attained without large, long effort that is stable and consistent. And you're not just going to, meditate your way there in a couple of weeks. You're not just going to, draw on the law of attraction, as they call it, and just, manifest things on your own. It's not how it works. It gives a very different explanation than those concepts pervade in the very popular field of New Age thought, which is a kind of watered-down derivative of the Theosophical Society's concepts stemming from Blavatsky and after her death, which she didn't intend, but it happened anyway. So, occultism is not mainstream science, and it's not mainstream New Age thought, and it's also not mainstream religious thought. It's kind of a synthesis, and it's not necessarily the mainstream philosophical thought either. It's a synthesis of all those things at a deeper, more significant, more abstract level. And all those fields come into a kind of like a coalescence or an aggregation as one single field of study where all three, science, philosophy, and religion, work together as opposed to as oppositional fields of study where they build on each other, they complement each other in the entire field of its study, which kind of will be lost when science and religion went in each other's throats and got separated as two diametrically opposed paradigms when they should never have been. And I found that also very interesting because it seemed to make more sense. So, this is what occultism is. It is not the devil. There is black magic, but that's not what it was intended for, and that's really just an inversion of general occultism, which is white magic. Allegedly, you can call it that. Or, it's really working in harmony with the universe, using knowledge of its laws to bring things into harmony with your own willpower and energy. That is what it's designed to do. And it is designed specifically for self-growth, self-spiritual growth, and to pretty much help mankind progress spiritually along its spiritual evolutionary path. As it's technically its destiny, though it's not a guaranteed destiny by any means. We are, at this moment, quickly dropping off the ledge into drastic, deep materialism, where it might almost be irrecoverable, the spiritual side of ourselves, if we go too far. Which is part of the reason why I've started this podcast, is because it has gotten so bad that I feel the world needs to have this message pervade to combat the deep technological, technocratic, materialistic paradigm that's being and essentially foisted upon us by global elites and by mainstream academia that is either too dogmatic, too stubborn, too entrenched, or too bought off to do otherwise. So, basically, for us to progress and to not fall into a deep pit of unabashed, non-spiritual, technological materialism that is almost irretrievable, I feel, and other people in the world feel, like Mark Passio, that these concepts need to be genuinely distributed. And maybe not the practice, but the ideas, the philosophy, the laws of the cosmos, the nature of ourselves, and our relationship to the cosmos and then to the divine. All of it kind of interconnecting. And by no means do I expect anyone to go into occult practice. That's a very different matter. But the information regarding the conceptual framework for our reality, for humanity's narrative and origin story of themselves and why we're here and where we're supposed to go and why, I think it's absolutely pivotal that we understand these concepts. And I mean, even today, I'm still dumbfounded that I even found my way onto this path at all, because I never even heard of it. This is still 7 years ago, and I didn't truly start studying occult concepts until I bought this book in 2020, which was 4 years after I became aware of different aspects and explanations of our reality, which is called The Mystical Kabbalah by D.M. Fortune, which is really not so much a school of thought as a practical, technical way of unfolding yourself and understanding your relationship to the universe through these 10 spheres. These 10 spheres, and this part right here, that's the divine, the highest divine, the absolute, as they call it, the Ein Sof. And then these other spheres right here are the interconnected states of cosmic emanation unfoldment, which basically, in a more colloquial way, is to say that that's how the cosmic building occurs, is through these different states. From the least material, meaning the most spiritual, which really is about density. It's not that there's no substance, it's that the substance is such a rare makeup that it's totally visible to us. And most reality is that way. We're only in the most dense part. Our eyes can only see the most dense parts. But there are much less dense parts that are still all around us and within us, that these, what they call the 10 spheres of the Sephiroth, correlate to. And this is basically a glyph and a practical method for understanding it and using it to unfold your own spiritual development. It's just one way to do it. Though the West uses that tree, it's called the Tree of Life, to do a lot of that over here because it's very well equipped and well structured for the Western mindset that we have over here to do spiritual growth and unfoldment. And that's opposed to like the ones in the Far East, like in India, where there's mantras and Buddhism, and a lot of their extremely rigorous methods are not well equipped to be utilized by Westerners. So this was, I wouldn't say created, but it has been utilized by the Westerners who rediscovered occultism, mainly in the 1800s, as a method for spiritual unfoldment, exploration, and growth that works well for us over here as Westerners. In the East, it's different. Though, interestingly enough, they all agree, across time, across cultures, across mystery schools, and across traditions, on all the fundamental aspects about the universe and our relationship to it. The main differences being how you practically engage in spiritual growth, the technical path, the paths to that unfoldment differ based on culture and school, while, say, the cosmological aspects of what's the universe's makeup, how can you actually kind of narrowly define what God is, or as I like to call it, the unmanifested principle, the absolute and eternal essence, as opposed to calling it God. The nature of that abstract principle, the nature of our relationship to it, and how we can interact with it, which is not on a personal level by any means, which is one of the major differences between esoteric thought and mainstream religious thought, is this is no personal deity whatsoever. It's very impersonal. In fact, it's not even really present at all, though it is technically in everything. We are a mere reflection of that absolute principle and kind of a fractal of it. Like a mirrored reflection of that. Everything is, from animal to plant to man to mineral, everything in the universe is derived from that essence. But it isn't technically that essence, and you can't interact with it in the way that typically is thought to interact with it in, say, Christianity. But nonetheless, it is there, and it is divine. And so this is kind of a rough intro into how I got interested in this, why it intrigued me, some of the basic tenets, and the two aspects of occultism, the aspects of our consciousness and the aspects of the universe, the natural laws, which I will go into in the next podcast episode, because it needs definitely an episode all by itself. And I will also go into the 7 principles of man, or what is commonly called the 7 bodies that man exists within and is part of his full constitution and being. Not being just physical, we have higher bodies that are not visible, that we cannot see, but has apparently been, witnessed and discovered and interacted with by every tradition that bears the name of esoteric or occult, and they all say the same thing about it across time and across culture and tradition. Those are the things they all agree on, just not the practical methods. So, for example, you have an etheric body, an astral body, a physical body, a mental body, spiritual soul, and a spirit. So those are the bodies, and I know I'm missing one. That's because the mental body splits into two. And the 7 Hermetic principles, and this is just to cover it before the next episode so that you at least are aware of what the next episode might entail. The 7 principles that are required to be in action, present throughout the structure of an unfolding cosmos or new cosmos are: 1, the most important one, the universe is mental. It's not physical. The universe is God's consciousness, a reflection of it. Not exactly, but it's the exact opposite of what I was told. It made more sense when I really thought about it deeply and meditated on it. The universe is mental, meaning it had to exist first as an idea before it came into become physically manifested. Which really means that the realm of archetypes exists before the realm of the physical. Which means the physical is built upon the models. And that's what that basically refers to. Then you have basically the law of correspondence, which is a famous axiom by the Hermetic school of thought called as above, so below, which means almost exactly like it states. The law of analogy applies on all planes, meaning as in the higher realms, in the divine realms, so also in the lower, the denser realms, meaning the law of analogy to understand. If you understand how things function here, you can understand how things might function in these higher realms by this concept that the pervading nature of manifestation is identical on all planes, as above, so below, as below, so above. Man is a miniature concept of God, and God is a large concept of cosmic man. And that's why I draw it that way, with man superimposed on the tree of life. So, then the third principle is the law of vibration, which modern physics totally agrees with. Everything is in a constant state of vibration. Nothing is ever at rest. Nothing is motionless. Even all the things around us that we see that seem to be totally at rest, like this table or this book, if you went down to the atomic level, it's totally in a rapid state of vibration at all times, consisting of barely a few atoms in an empty space, and they're all in rapid motion at all times, even though we can't see that. It seems physical to us. It seems stationary. So, spirit is a very rapid, is the most rapid vibration, to the point where it almost seems at rest. And then the most dense things, like say a rock, are at such a slow rate of vibration as to seem also at rest, and then everything in between. Simply stating, everything vibrates, everything is in motion, nothing is dead, nothing is in a state of static rest, ever. Matter of the appearance, ostensibly, of its behavior. On a deeper level, on the finer level, it is in motion at all times. Everything is in constant activity. Never really halting, except for when the cosmos is disintegrated. Then you have the law of polarity. And the polarity law basically states that everything that comes in a manifestation has to be opposites. They have to come in binary form. Meaning, the heat will never exist without coexisting. Fire and ice come into manifestation at the exact same time because things have to be in balance and equalized or in equilibrium. Thus, nothing comes in a manifestation except for repairs, because that's the nature of equilibrium, for stability. Thus, on all levels, there's an opposite for everything. It's always, the universe is created in binary form, so to speak. on all planes, with the cosmic, divine, or the microscopic. This fourth law is the law of rhythm. The law of rhythm states that everything rises and falls, everything goes in cycles, and nothing is ever in a non-stop state of continuous progress. So, essentially what you have is a bell curve, a continuous bell curve, where everything is always in motion, up and down, the rise of civilization, the fall of civilization, and it's a law. Nothing will ever just stay the same. It's a pendulum. The whole universe is on this pendulum. So there's always an upbuilding and then a downbreaking, a stimulation and then a destruction, to then create another stimulation. And then the fifth law is essentially the law of cause and effect, which involves karma. It involves that there's not, as just space and stated, there's no effect that doesn't have a cause, and no cause that doesn't have an effect. Everything moves according to the law. Nothing is by chance, nothing is at random. Things that seem at random or seem to be chance are just, basically undetermined at that time based on the knowledge we have of reality. Doesn't mean there isn't a reason, or it's a miracle. No, there's an actual law behind it. There is either a celestial or an etheric equation that is involved in the process. It's not, what you'd call fantastical. It works according to a process, whether or not we know about it. Then you have the law of, you also have the law of gender, which is another aspect, to a degree like polarity. But unlike polarity, it is literally talking about the entire universe is built on and I know some people might not like this, on a binary female and male paradigm on all levels: atomic, celestial, human, animal, interstellar. It's all basically based on attraction and repulsion. There's technically female atoms and male atoms, and the reason they work together and aggregate is because of an attraction between the two types, for example. So they state that the entire universe is based on, just like polarity, not only opposites, but on gender opposites, negative and female, yin and yang, negative and positive energies. There's always the two male and female energy types throughout the entire archetypal structure of the superstructure of the universe. And that's just how it is formed, and without that, there would be no equilibrium. So, at the same time, we also have, I guess that's actually all of them. And all those laws are contained in this book, The Bargain. We get a very good explanation. And it's not super long. It's only 144 pages, and that's that edition. The other editions are only 100. Though they run counter to what we generally think of as how the universe works. I was pretty dumbfounded when I first read it, and it took time to understand it. But it made sense eventually. So, I'm going to end with that. And the next podcast, we will talk about the bodies of man, and go into more detail on the 7 Hermetic principles, and why they matter, and why, in any way, they are seemingly more rational than what we've been presented either by science or by mainstream religious thought. And essentially, why do we need to know it today? What's the real reason? And I will leave that for the next podcast, because it has to do with current events, not just philosophical thought. And so with that, I'd like to end, and thank you so much for being with me today, and I hope you've watched this to the end, and I hope that I've given at least an inkling of a good explanation and introduction to these concepts of what is the occult and how I even became interested. And please like and subscribe and share this if you'd like, or don't if you don't want to. Either way, fine with me. I just hope you enjoyed it. I hope that it hopefully piqued your interest, and this next time on Occultism. And thank you, and you have a great night.